have been. I'm a historian of the late Ottoman Empire and the Republic of Turkey, indeed, and primarily the late 19th and the 20th century, and about it's a subject about which I've written a number of books, and they deal partly with political history, partly also with social history, and partly with cultural history. And in a sense, the topic of today encapsulates all three. It is an issue, modernization, modernity in Turkey, that has political aspects, cultural aspects, and also social aspects. It's also, of course, very much an issue that's on the agenda today. What does modernity really mean? What does modernity, being modern, mean? It means different things to two very different people, as we will come to discuss. Now, for a very long time, modernity was very simple. We knew what we meant by modernity. Generally speaking, you'd say that until roughly the 1980s, the so-called modernization paradigm was hegemonic in historiography, in history writing. What that meant was that essentially all societies were understood as being on the same path of development and towards a single goal, a single end station, if you like. A single modernity that was characterized by a number of aspects: industrialization, of course. Developed societies needed to be industrialized, have a market economy, functioning market economy, and also a belief in progress through human action. In that sense, also a very secular worldview. A secular worldview that trusted in man's ability to change things and to achieve progress. Individualism, but at the same time also the emergence of the nation state and of mass politics were all part of this concept of modernity, which was seen as, in a sense, the final stage of development. And of course, in the people inspired by this modernization paradigm, there is a very clear hierarchy also among societies, among countries, dependent on where they are on this ladder of progress. Now, they were all assumed to be on that ladder, but at different steps of the ladder. And of course, it needs no explaining that in the 1950s, 60s, or 70s, it was the West, more precisely perhaps North America, that was assumed to be at the top of the ladder. Now, of course, that concept of modernization and of modernity has been challenged a lot over the last 20 to 30 years. It has been pointed out by many people from the left, for instance, the adherents of the dependency school and of the concept of incorporation, that it was not just a question of some societies, some countries being higher up on the ladder, but that they were there precisely because they had been able to relegate other societies to lower places in that hierarchy. And that it was, in a sense, thanks to the underdevelopment of parts of the globe, that development could occur. The development of underdevelopment, a very popular theme in sociology of the 70s. Now, when we look at the situation today, we see that by and large, thanks in part to globalization and the fact that very different types of modernity seem to have sprung up in East Asia, for instance, or in Southeast Asia, or in the Gulf states, that we seem to have embraced the concept of multiple modernities, which was first coined by the Israeli sociologist Shmuel Eisenstadt. Multiple modernities recognizes the idea that yes, these elements, industrialization, etc., and that the industrialization, secularization, market economy, that they are essential ingredients of this modernity, but that in different places in the world, the end result of this development is very different. That East Asian modernity is very different from European modernity, and that Latin American modernity is very different from North American modernity. So multiple modernities. Mixtures of modernity that are very different, but all equally authentic. They are all modern, in a sense. Now, in this context, it seems sensible to judge the Turkish experience and achievement on its own merits rather than to measure Turkish modernity against some idealized yardstick like Europe or the West, as, of course, people believing in the modernization paradigm would do. We know, as a matter of fact, we see, if we're interested in Turkey, and we see before our very eyes that in Turkey today, very different concepts of modernity are actually locked in a very fierce struggle. And we also see that the easy assumption, which was prevalent basically, I think, until the 90s, that modernization in Turkey, a more modern Turkey, automatically also meant a more European Turkey. That's not necessarily true. So, however, for the historian of Turkey interested in the early republic, and you know the republic was founded in 1923, so the early republic in this sense means, let's say, the first 30 years, Turkey from the 20s to the 50s. There is a paradox, because on the one hand, it's undeniably true that the modernization program of the first generation leaders of the Republic of Turkey, and those first 30 years, has been enormous, that they have had an enormous impact on Turkish modernization. But we've also come to recognize that their brand of modernization is only one of several different forms of modernization that different groups in Turkey have advocated and embraced in the 20th century. So Turkey is a country of multiple modernities. But the paradox is this: for the Kemalists, as they are called, and these founding fathers of the Republic, and sorry, they were all males. For these founding fathers, modernity was not a contested or a fragmented concept. For them, it was very clear. It was the opposite. It was modernity represented by the European civilization of their day. Now, this is evident in the speeches and proclamations of the first president of the Republic, Mustafa Kemal, and later Ataturk, the founder of the Republic. After the victory in the Independence War and the proclamation of the Republic in 1923, the concept of national ideal, the mefkure, which had been very important during that national struggle, the attempts after World War I to keep the country intact and independent, that national ideal that gets a different meaning. It's the term mefkure, ideal, is used constantly in speeches and proclamations of the president and of other Republican leaders in the early years of the Republic. But it is no longer about national struggle, national independence. It is about national development and modernity. Next to mefkure, ideal, the term muasir, contemporary, modern, becomes a key term in this discourse. Linked to a third term, which is also very important, but of course you need to know the Turkish, medeniyet, civilization. So in Turkish there's a nice alliteration. You have mefkure, you have muasir, you have medeniyet. You have the ideal, contemporary, modern, and civilization. And these terms, occur countless times in speeches and proclamations and articles produced by this first generation of the Republic. Most famously, they occur in a short but very influential speech that the president, Mustafa Kemal, still then, not yet Atatürk, held on the occasion of the 10th anniversary of the Republic in 1933. In it, he declares that the Turks would raise their nation and their culture to the level of contemporary civilization. That's what he says. And there's no doubt whatsoever what that civilization was. It was the civilization of contemporary Europe. The term muasir, which had become popular in the years around World War I, under the influence of important intellectuals like Mehmet Ziya Gökalp, in the 30s and 40s gives way to yet another term, a synonym really, asri, modern, contemporary, which, as is shown by the wonderful album Üç Kuşak Cumhuriyet, Three Generations of Republic, became a very popular epithet for anything from apartment blocks, the modern apartment block, to makeup, modern makeup, and even chicken farming, contemporary chicken farming. Turkish newspapers of the day are full of advertisements for all of these wonderful new inventions that are all asri, they're all modern. So modern becomes a crucial adjective. It is almost synonymous with good, you could say. The iconography to illustrate the concept, for instance in advertisement, clearly identifies it as being part of contemporary European culture. And you see that. I mean, and the advertisements refer to Parisian fashion and to British and American industrial goods, etc. So the Kemalist leadership of the 20s, 30s and 40s wanted Turkey to be modern, and they had a fairly concrete view of what they meant by that term. Still, statements like those of Atatürk speak about modernity in a rather general sense. They do not go into details on which components make up this desired state of modernity. To get a better idea of what the early Kemalists had in mind when they talked about modernity, I've taken a closer look at the journal La Turquie Kemalist. And maybe some of you already know the journal, are familiar with that if you're interested in modern Turkish history. But if you don't, let me briefly introduce it. La Turquie Kemalist was the main propaganda medium of the government in Ankara, directed at a foreign audience. Of course, a modernizing but also dictatorial regime like the Kemalist regime of the 30s and 40s directed a lot of propaganda at its own population. This is the primary propaganda medium directed at foreigners, at Europe. It started publication in 1934 and it continued until 1941, issue number 46, and publication and presumably also distribution in war-torn Europe then became very difficult, and during the war only one solitary issue appeared suddenly in 1943 out of nothing. That was number 47. After the war, in 1947, publication was resumed, but it ended in 1948 after only 2 issues. So, 49 issues in all. The journal was first called La Turquie Kemalist, as you see here. But very soon the name was changed to the now more unusual La Turquie Kemalist. And the reason for that is that these were years in which the Turkish government promoted a new linguistic theory which held that all languages in the world derived from a single original language called the Sun language, which was supposed to have been spoken in Central Asia, and moreover that all languages of the world derived from that original language through Turkish. And the reason the originally Arabic Kemal, first name of the president, is rendered as Kemal, is that in this theory that name too was given a Turkish pedigree. It was supposed to be originally Turkish rather than Arabic. Part of the nationalist linguistic theory making of the 1930s. Okay. Later on, when the Sun language theory fell into disrepute in Turkey and was quietly dropped, it returned to its original title, La Turquie Kemalist. It was lavishly produced, certainly for the Turkey of that day, in a large format, printed on glossy paper and richly illustrated. Most of the articles were written in French, but over the years, a number of German articles also started to appear, and that number increased. There were also a small number of English language contributions. The authors were mostly Turkish, with a sizable minority of Europeans. Among the latter, the German academics who came to Turkey after 1933 and the takeover by Hitler